I just want to say that I am not entirely sure that this is a skinwalker since I live in Australia, but what we encountered seems close enough to say that it is, and how I described it as a skinwalker. Okay, so it was the summer of 2015. My buddy, who I will call P, and his older yet still teenage cousin, who happened to be staying at his place, whom I will call L, were hanging out at his place since we were on school break. We were both in high school, and I don't know if any of you guys know how Australia has summertime around the same time as Christmas. So naturally, being a few days near Christmas, that was all we would talk about, asking about what we were planning on doing, our presents, our family members, etc. Eventually, P's mom told us to leave and take the dog on a walk. We thought that it was a bit strange since she usually only lets us go into the backyard by his old treehouse and his pool so that she could keep an eye on us, especially when P's dad was away on a business trip, like it was on this day. But we did. For reference, P has two dogs, a male golden retriever and a female Caucasian shepherd. I will not say their names, but both dogs are quite long-haired, and since Australia's sun is quite hot, they had to get their hair cut down so that they could actually survive this Australian sun. This information is somewhat needed for later in the story. So anyway, we began to walk them, and after a while, since it was hot, Elle said that we should take a trail in the nearby brush so that we could get some shade. We all agreed and we went into this bush. For reference, the bush is basically the Australian version of the woods. Usually in the summers you don't go into the bush due to snakes, but we were young and wanted to get out of the sun, so we just went. Anyway, after about 10 minutes of walking in the bush, both dogs stopped. The golden retriever starts whimpering and tries to run away, and the Caucasian shepherd stands her ground, simultaneously sniffing in the air, then growling. Elle thought that the golden retriever might have been bitten by a snake. Now, like I said before, both breeds usually have long hair to somewhat protect them from snake bites. But since it was the summer and their hair was short, this is a problem, and they would need to be taken to the vet immediately. Elle quickly checked and couldn't see anything, but as I looked around on the ground for snakes, wishing that we didn't come here, I saw it. At first I thought it was either a kangaroo or a large dog, which was about 17 meters, which in USA mathematics is about 55 feet and 9 inches. It was acting odd as it had its back against the tree, arms crossed like a human, just watching us. Kangaroos just usually lay down if they are tired or something, but this thing was upright laying on the tree. So I yelled out to them, "What is that kangaroo doing?" B and Dal looked over and saw it both. Said something along the lines of, "That ain't no kangaroo, mate." They were right, because it saw that we saw it, and after looking at it, I describe it as a tall man-kangaroo hybrid thing. Arms like a man and small claws on his fingers, yet legs like a kangaroo, an extremely light brown coat. Face was similar to that of a kangaroo, but also was a bit square-shaped, like a mastiff dog. It both simultaneously ran and hopped as it came towards us. I think that it only attacked because we all saw it, as it looked predatory. And when we spotted it, almost like it was minding its own business, and when it saw us see it, then it thought that we were a threat or something. We didn't really have time to run, only making it 2 steps back before it was right in front of us. It lunged at me, but just as it knocked me to the ground, the Caucasian shepherd jumped up, biting its arm. P fell forward and let the dog's lead go, and let the dog do what it had to do. Since a Caucasian shepherd dog can have the bite force of 700 psi, which for reference, a lion only has the bite force of 650 psi, you know that this creature was truly in pain, when it let out a yell, sounding similar to that of a dog whimpering in pain as the Caucasian shepherd's jaw clamped down on the arm. The creature then began to claw at the Caucasian shepherd with its free hand. Usually this wouldn't be a problem for the Caucasian shepherd, as their long fur would act as a shield against their skin when they fight wolves in Russia. But since it was the summertime again, her neck and body were exposed, since the fur was too short. I was basically pinned in the ground as the two were fighting above me. The Caucasian shepherd did manage to move from the arm to the neck of this creature, but this somehow didn't kill this creature. The creature yelled out in pain since the Caucasian shepherd was too weak from its injuries really to continue the bite around the neck. The creature managed to push the Caucasian shepherd off its neck. It looked like the fight was about to turn in favor for the creature, but Elle grabbed a large stick nearby and swung it at the back of the creature's ear, which barely did anything as the creature turned around towards him, grabbing the stick from Elle when he swung it the second time. This allowed the Caucasian shepherd to jump onto the creature and sink another bite into the creature's shoulder. Clearly too injured to continue, the creature got the Caucasian shepherd off before it ran and hopped away into the brush, out of sight. We all ran out of the bush as fast as we could, just to get back to P's house. P and L were crying as I was limping, barely able to keep up. We didn't care that we entered the house. We needed an adult. So P ran upstairs to get his mom from the room, as L was checking my cuts and the Caucasian's wounds. But all we heard from upstairs was screaming from P's mom. She brought him downstairs by the ear, wearing lingerie, and a man in his underwear, who was not P's father, walking down the stairs behind her. She was pissed, Audi slang referring to somebody being either drunk or extremely angry. In this case, she was not drunk, but after seeing the Caucasian shepherd's injuries and the scratches, she calmed down and told the male to leave, which he accepted and quickly went back upstairs to get his things before leaving. She quickly changed. It was Elle who had told her what had happened, and simply said that it was a large feral dog. She believed him, and she then took the Caucasian shepherd to the vet, while Elle took me to a doctor, since he had a car. The Caucasian shepherd unfortunately died in 2019, not due to her injuries, while the golden retriever is still alive and well. P and L said nothing about P's mother and that whole situation to P's father, but he had somehow found out around New Year's and filed for a divorce. I don't know much about the divorce besides the fact that P's mother hit P's dad with an AVO that he did not deserve. AVO is kind of like a restraining order, naturally causing issues in the divorce. As for the creature itself, after doing some research online and watching some YouTube videos, like that of the channels of Mr. Ballin, What Larks Benefit, Mr. Nightmare, Darkness Prevails, the most likely thing that it could be has to be a skinwalker. But I do have my doubts as I live in Australia and not the USA. So honestly, I don't know what we encountered. But what I do know is that when I decide to get a dog, the Caucasian shepherd is in my top 10 for obvious reasons. I'm a soldier in the US Army. I'm stationed at a base in southern Arizona. Over the weekend, some of my buddies and I decided that we would go exploring around the mountains surrounding the base. We woke up early to get a head start, and before long, we were well on our way up the mountain. We decided to take a break by sitting down on some rocks that seemed to be like a form of benches on a large ravine. The view up there was just breathtaking. We sat there for about 20 minutes, catching our breath and just taking it all in. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we heard what sounded like a mariachi band playing from behind us. I turned around and I can best describe what I saw as a 1800s military figure with an oversized cartoon like exaggerated Mexican head, mustache, sombrero, and all. It was awkwardly skipping towards us like it was trying to dance. Once it got close, we could see it flailing its arms like a poorly programmed robot, attempting to play the guitar it didn't have. As it came closer, we realized that this mariachi music was coming from its head, not just its mouth. The mouth, however, was forming the lyrics, but it seemed like it was out of sync, almost like what you would see when your video is ahead of your audio on your TV. This thing was running right at us, but we were way too intrigued to be scared. Instead, we just watched, mesmerized. I'm not even sure if I know what happened next. From what I saw, this thing was just skipping right by us and right into the ravine. And instead of falling straight down, it seemed to be glitching its way down. And then as it got halfway down, it literally just disappeared. It was like a literal glitch in the Matrix. We were all just sitting there, just completely dumbfounded for a minute, when all of a sudden, we hear a girl screaming, coming from that ravine. Our reaction to this was kinda hard to articulate. Being men, especially military trained men, it is somewhat expected that we would be inclined to help a woman in need. But this wasn't that. This was different. It was almost like we were hypnotized by it, so much so that we had forgotten about the complete unnatural incident that just happened moments before. We all began racing down this ravine, which was extremely dangerous because the height was extremely steep. We didn't care. We needed to help this woman. After leaping from rock to rock, we eventually got to the source of this small cavern. It was an opening on the ledge, in the middle of the ravine. I was the first person on the ledge, so I got down on my stomach and began low crawling into this cave. I noticed immediately as I entered this cave that I could no longer hear the screaming, and I didn't care about it anymore. Immediately after entering that cave, I became overcome with an unimaginable thirst. In the cave, there was a little ledge and a small lake about 20 feet below. As I saw it, I immediately began to crawl toward it, attempting to crawl off the ledge and into it. I wanted to drink that lake, all of it. Something was caught on my leg somehow, however, so as much as I struggled, I couldn't crawl forward. After struggling for about a minute or so, I saw what I believe was the most deformed mermaid imaginable leap 20 feet from the water and coming inches from my face before suddenly falling back into the water, torso first, folding backwards like a sandwich. The weirdest thing about this was the splash it created. The splash was way too big for this creature, and the sound was even louder, like it was made by an over-the-top special effects crew. Immediately after this, I could feel myself being dragged back, but it was just by my friends, thank God. We quickly went to the bottom of this ravine for safety. Once we knew we were in the clear at the bottom, we looked up at the cavern, and that thing was no longer there. I'm starting to suspect that maybe I was delusional, or maybe I saw a skinwalker and a glitch in the Matrix. I don't know, it was in the desert, but one day I would like to find out. I first was acquainted with Robert because my grandmother lived in an apartment on 9th and Ingra in Anchorage, Alaska. This was in the late 70s. I would go to see my grandma quite often since I only lived a few blocks away. She was always happy for company because she had a hard time getting around and wasn't in the best of health. A lot of times my brother would come with me and our other cousin just to visit her. My grandmother, with all of us kids, would be so happy to see us that she would often give us money to go next door to the donut shop and get a dozen donuts while she made the strongest coffee in the world that you could stand a spoon in. After knowing Robert for a spell, he got to asking how Grandma was. You know, the chit-chat things. He would say that he just got some dinner rolls out of the oven and that they were still warm and proceed to wrap them up and to tell Grandma that he said hi. I thought he was one of the nicest people to ask about my grandma, and since he knew most of my family that went up to his shop, that he did those things because we were just such good customers for him, and he was our good neighbor too. I knew he kind of liked me, well, more than liked me, but figured he was harmless and just this nerdy guy who had an eye for the ladies. He really had an acne problem, but to be fair, I did too, since I also did work in a donut shop. Standing over a vat of hot grease frying donuts doesn't exactly help the complexion. I worked for the Donut Tree on Northern Light Boulevard. I was 17 and was already on my own. I worked the graveyard shift. Before that, there was the swing shift, but switched because the pay was a lot higher if you worked the grave. I was trying to graduate high school and pay rent at the same time. I had a row in life, but I was young and energetic and, more importantly, free. Free to work myself to death for next to nothing. One day, I got this great notion that since Robert always liked me, well, more than liked me, I thought I would ask him for a job. I figured that since I had the experience as a donut fryer, maybe I could get a higher wage. Plus, his shop was way more known and successful. It's odd, but afterwards I noticed that he had an all-male staff. He never did hire females, that I'm aware of at least. He said of course that he would hire me when and if one of his donut fryers quits. I never did work for him. It was not in my cards. Thank God. In the mid-80s, it came out that he was honestly an actual serial killer. He was going around and killing street women. He would fly them out to the wilderness and hunt them down in cold blood. Some women he brought home and chained them up and had his way with them when his family was out of town. His wife and children never had a clue. I never would have thought that this kind soul would treat me and my family with such respect and generosity, who would also turn out to be a monster. Sometimes I wonder how I escaped him. One time he even picked me up from hitchhiking, but nothing strange ever happened though. It did seem a little bit rather quiet on the ride. I remember asking him about stuff in general, but they were like one-word answers. I thought that odd given the number of years I had known him. Turns out, you can never really know a person. Can't even know them by the way they act. It took me a long time afterwards to ever even trust anybody again. I really did think of him as a friend, and I really thought that he couldn't harm a fly. I'm kind of glad that my grandmother died before she knew. So the most scary part of this is that he seemed like he was just a normal nerdy guy who just had an eye for a young woman. Plus he was a married man, harmless, right? I wonder why and how I escaped from being one of his victims sometimes. I'll never know why. Just glad to be alive, to wonder about it. My mom has told me this story for years, and I always thought that it was so cool and creepy. This happened 2 days before Ted Bundy was finally caught. For background on Ted Bundy, if you need it, he was a serial killer who brutally murdered many, many women, always young and pretty, which is exactly what my mother was. Just under 2 months before this story takes place, He went into a sorority house in Florida State University and murdered 2 girls there and brutally beat 2 others. Then he went to a nearby house and brutally beat up and injured 1 more, all in the span of about 15 minutes. At the time of this story, that was the most recent of his known murders, but it was later found out he actually killed a poor little 12-year-old girl between being caught and the college girl's murders. He was handsome and young, and his MO was to be very friendly and charming, and his clean-cut appearance made women trust him. Now to my mom's story. My mother and father had moved to Tallahassee 2 months prior and were living in a so-so area of apartment complexes. My dad was in school at FSU and had a Monday science lab that would let out at unpredictable times, depending entirely on how long that day's experiment lasted. My mom had not found a job and was pretty bored most of the day. She'd go on walks and walk the campus on Mondays to try and meet my dad if the timing happened to be right. But this particular day, his lab had let out before she could have gotten there, and she didn't see him. So she walked back to their apartment. As she was walking, she turned the corner onto the street where the apartments were on the other side of the road. Just as she did this, a guy in an orange Volkswagen Beetle, a pretty rare car, at least in this color, was coming down the street toward her and leaned over and waved at her in a really friendly, excited manner. My mother was rather confused. She and my dad didn't really know anyone down there, but she gave a small wave back. They had met another young couple a week before, and for a second she thought that it might have been this husband of hers, but then thought it would be a little weird for him to wave so excitingly to somebody that he barely even knew. She suddenly felt really uncomfortable about it and wanted to check to see if he was still around without really obviously turning and looking. She realized that if she crossed the street towards her apartment, she could get a good look to her right more naturally. As she did so, she saw the car had stopped just across the intersection she had turned the corner around initially. She could see by the lights that this guy was sitting with his foot on the brakes, and worse, that he had his head tilted up and blatantly watching her in his rearview mirror. She also knew the particular duplex that he was stopped at was vacant, so there was no way he was waiting for somebody or anything like that. My mom was thoroughly freaked out and trying to figure out what to do at this point, as there were no cell phones back then, thus no one she could call. But there was a nice thick tree up ahead, and she realized that if she walked behind it, she could walk away at such an angle that the tree would block his line of vision of her for quite a while, and he wouldn't know exactly where she was. She did this, and after getting a decent bit further, she peeped around the blocked line of vision, and his car was gone. She figured he realized that she was onto him and didn't want to deal with a woman putting up for a fight. As I said at the beginning of this post, Ted Bundy was caught 2 days later in an orange Beetle that was stolen 2 blocks from my parents' house. Bundy would apparently often return cars he'd stolen after using them to murder people, and my mom thinks that that's what he was planning on doing, but changed his mind, and that's why he was back in the area. So yeah, thankfully my mother was smart and not killed by Ted Bundy, and thus I exist. Edit. Bundy somewhat famously owned a beige Beetle, but he stole and was caught in an orange one. Before I begin this story, I'm letting you know that there is no way to prove it is real. It was told to me by a good friend's father, who is a very honest good man and has had no reason to embellish any story, and he has also never lied to anyone or possibly is a masterful actor. He's the kind guy who doesn't make stuff up, ever, which makes this tale even more convincing. My friend's dad was a young man in the 1970s, and he lived in the suburbs of a major American city. He wasn't older than 18 or 19. The economy back then wasn't great, and so guys especially, as young as him, would really take any job. After lots of searching, he finally found work for a contractor, mainly carpentry stuff and whatnot. His boss was a nice, friendly enough guy, but something about him was just a little off-putting. He had a nervous way about him, and yet was somehow inviting. One day my friend's dad needs to talk to him. The business is pretty informal and local, not very big deal. And so my friend's dad goes to his boss's house. He knocks on the door. No answer. For whatever reason, he finds the door is unlocked and decides to walk in. His boss is nowhere to be seen. He calls out his name a few times and hears shuffling in the basement. He hears the shuffling from the basement steps as his boss comes hurtling up them, flinging the door open, looking sweaty and angry. His boss apologizes for the entrance, and they talk business for a while before my friend's dad leaves. He was really weirded out by the situation and never showed up to work again, although he probably wouldn't be around today if he had. His boss was none other than John Wayne Gacy. I saw someone else post a Ted Bundy story, and I thought I would share one as well. Not a long story, but chilling. When my dad's girlfriend was in high school, in the 70s, she decided to ditch school one day just to go shopping at the local mall. This was in Colorado a few days prior to his capture. Anyway, she was leaving the mall, headed to the parking lot to where her car was, and stopped by a handsome young man. He approached her and asked if she was interested in modeling, as he was apparently posing as a photographer. For whatever reason, she felt something was a little odd about him and was feeling bad about ditching school, so politely declined and kept walking to her car. She says that she might have accepted his offer, but that was if she didn't have a weird feeling about the entire situation. She said she couldn't shake the feeling of how off the situation felt. She eventually realized that she had a near brush with death when a few days later, he had been arrested and brought to a jail that was only a few hours away from where he had approached her. He actually escaped from that jail as well and ended up abducting and killing another girl and dumping her body on the side of the road in town where I live. And I drive past that road very frequently. Like I said, short but chilling. Thanks for reading. I am a female who lives in an apartment complex. This evening after dark, I went downstairs to meet the delivery driver in front of our complex. I went out via our patio gate to get to the front. When I came back the same way to get back inside, I noticed a man, white, maybe late 30s, holding a bottle of wine and a bottle opener, standing inside the gate by the door entrance, watching me intently. It struck me as strange right away when I noticed. I had just come out of the very same door 5 to 8 minutes ago, and I had not seen him there. There was another group of people talking and eating nearby on the other side of the patio. As I approached the door to go inside, he walked towards me smiling while gesturing with the wine bottle opener and said, "Please tell me you live upstairs." Something about his tone and smile seemed off, like he was lying and trying to be smooth or something. The way that he spoke and walked towards me while stretching out his hand with the wine and bottle opener seemed very performative or theatric. The hair on my arm and neck stood up. I said, "Sorry, I don't live here, I'm just visiting." He said that he lived here and forgot his key. I let him in the door into the lobby area and told him the concierge at the front lobby could help him. He looked forlorn and sullen, yet subtly annoyed, all at once, and slowly came through the door and started towards the concierge. The front entrance where the concierge sits does not require your key to enter. When residents forget their key, they usually just go straight to the concierge via the front entrance, or they call a roommate or neighbor or their emergency maintenance line. A resident would have to get a new key right away, and to be able to get upstairs and get back into their apartment without a roommate. If he was visiting a resident, they would have given him a key to get back up or let him up. He could have called them or used the concierge desk phone in the lobby to call them. The concierge also has residents' phone numbers. I didn't want to be paranoid, but my instinct just screamed that he was not a resident and not invited by the residents. I think he wanted me to let him in on the elevator with me so then he could access someone's door. My roommate was pretty creeped out when I told her what happened. She said it kind of reminded her of something Bundy would do. She thought he sounded like he was trying to charmfully guilt trip me into letting him in, or possibly just getting him to the elevator and either gain access to someone else or, worst case, something sinister to me. Whatever his intent, his tone and demeanor creeped me out. And that's why I don't let people in. So, about 3 years ago, when I was 28, I worked as a guard in the large factory. I won't say the name, but it was in Fremont. I worked as a security guard, but mostly checked in on the visitors and helped people who forgot their badges by issuing temporary ones. There was this one dude who worked for the company that just didn't have a badge, so his manager would always sign him in as a guest. This was against our policy because clearly he wasn't on board, meaning that he didn't go through any full background check process. We felt since his manager was coming in to get him a visitor pass every morning, we had nothing to really worry about, and plus we saw this dude every day. One day he asked for my number, and I didn't really feel comfortable in giving it to him. After badgering me for a while, he wrote his number down on a napkin and asked me to text him. I didn't text him. A week or two goes by, and he walks out for a lunch break and tells me to text him right now. I knew he was going to come back, and I had to let him in since he didn't have a badge, so I felt the pressure to text him. I don't remember everything that he said verbatim, but he was trying to get me to go on a date with him, and I let him know that I don't date people that work with me. There were a few more exchanges, and then he said something really weird, that he was going to get me one day. I didn't think much of it. Still have the text on my old phone, but the screen is broken. One day my supervisor texts in our group chat if we know where this guy is. He always sat in the break room next to the pillar watching something on his propped up phone. He was found there and escorted to the front of the building. We didn't know what was going on, but found out that a bunch of US Marshals hopped out of an SUV, guns pointed at him, arrested him, and that was that. He apparently was murdering women. I was sick to my stomach. He was using a fake name and an identity the entire time, which obviously he never went through their onboarding. I always wondered what he was watching on his phone. Looking back, it was clear that he was hiding something by that pillar. was living in Asheville, North Carolina at the time. I hung out at a local coffee shop all of the time. The day I met this guy was like any other. I went into the cafe, ordered my coffee, sat down to read the local I Wanna, when an older man came up to me and asked if he could sit down. I had always gone in there to meet new people, and usually I went with the younger guys. But I thought, what the heck? I said yes. He sat down and started asking me questions. Where did I work? Where did I live? Did I have any relatives, etc.? Of course, during this discourse, I asked him questions and found out that he was a traveling salesman who traveled I-40 from Ohio to Asheville. The last question he had asked me was how old I was. When I told him, he couldn't believe me. I looked a lot younger than I was. At the time, I was 29, but looked like a teenager. Part of my quiche was just showing people my ID, and I showed it to him too. As soon as he saw it, he said, "Thanks for the chat," and got up and left. I didn't think anything of it until I went to get another cup of coffee. The guy behind the coffee bar asked me if the old man was bothering me. I told him that it wasn't anything that I couldn't handle and thanked him for his concern. The next night I went to the strip club with one of my on-again, off-again boyfriends that had just opened up to a town over. My boyfriend asked me if I wanted to go to the strip because somebody had offered the manager $500 for me to strip. I didn't want to, but was pretty interested to find out who it was that was going to be paying me that much to strip. Coincidence or not, it was the same guy from the coffee shop. I was creeped out. He came up to me later on that night and started talking to me about how many people he had killed in Vietnam, especially young women and children. I was really creeped out then and edged away from him and found another group of friends to hang out with and made sure that I was never alone. He didn't try anything though, he just left. I kind of freaked out, but didn't really do anything about it. I just went to work the next day, and one of the girls that I worked with came up to me and asked if I had heard about the girl who had been stabbed in the neck from behind as she came out of one of the bars. The girl went on saying that her dad was a cop and they were looking for a serial killer who had killed young girls from Ohio to Asheville off of I-40. They weren't sure, but they had thought that it was an older guy who probably was a traveling salesman. The cop thought that he had a thing for women who had my characteristics and were 18 and under. I freaked out and told her about the guy. She called her dad, but I don't know if they believed me or not, but they didn't question me or anything. I really think the only thing that saved me was that I was much older. So, this story happened back when I was in about 5th grade in 2005, when I lived in western Montana. My bedroom was shared with my 2nd grader sister, and we had a king-size bed that we shared. To describe my house a little bit, our room was facing the backyard, but was the basement room. Basically, standing up looking out at the window in my room, I was eye level to the ground outside. Up and to the left above my window, I could see our outer deck, which looked into our upstairs kitchen. Kind of confusing, but bear with me. Anyways, this particular night, my sister and I were having a sleepover with our friend, and they were in the bed with us. When we were falling asleep around 1 a.m., our friend woke us up to show us that there was a deer that was on the deck. We looked out and all we saw was a deer on the deck. This was a normal thing in Montana, so we laid back down. I guess my friend was staying up staring at it, and she woke us up about 5 minutes later saying that she thought that there was an actual person. Right then we looked and we saw the shadow move a little, and it was clearly a tall person's silhouette. We started freaking out, and then we saw 2 green lasers. They were just 2 small pinpoint lights that were coming from this guy's head area. We all thought that it was just like binoculars. At this point, we were on high alert, and our eyes had just adjusted a little bit, and we saw it was clearly a guy looking into our kitchen window. I was too scared to go tell my parents all the way upstairs and pass by the view of this guy looking in the window. So we used my friend's cell phone and called the home phone. None of us owned any cell phones at the time. It rang loudly, and we watched this guy run full speed off the deck. As soon as he ran away, the three of us ran screaming upstairs and told my dad. He called the cops and they searched the streets, but they never found the guy. Now, here's where things get weird. So just 2 weeks earlier, the town's police station sent around notices to our neighborhoods, telling us that a person of interest and dangerous sexual predator who had warrants out for his arrest had been spotted in our area. A tip had said that he was staying with a family member 3 streets down from us. I remember this because I remember my mom, who was a bit paranoid, drove us by the address of the home on the notice one time and made us very aware that this was going on and would not let us ride our bikes outside during this time. I remember looking at the house every time we drove by. Turns out, maybe 3 months later, the same man was apprehended for a kidnapping and abuse and murders of 2 children and killing their family in Idaho, only 2-ish hours away from my house. In some of his interrogations, he confessed to his stalkings of kids by watching their houses at night with what? Night vision goggles. The same green lights that we saw that night. I also one time found an obscure website that had some of the writings where he was discussing living in Montana at various times. It also discussed that right before killing this family, he was searching for children to kidnap. We were the same ages as the kids that he had kidnapped. Disclaimer: I have no proof that he was the person looking at our window, but the evidence all adds up to me, down to the timeline and area that I lived in at the time. I won't go into the whole detail of his crimes. They are all over the news, and you can read about them. I've researched this guy in depth. He has alleged encrypted diaries of his crimes and filmed the tortures he committed. So, I consider myself blessed. Hopefully he stays locked up so that I have to never meet him. I know this may also fit in the serial killer sub, but since this was partly my experience, I thought I'd share it as well. I work at a coffee shop. I'm usually always the only person on this shift, which means opening and closing by myself. Even though I'm in Baltimore, I was pretty aloof and not too worried about anything happening. The other day I had 2 guys that live across the street from my job come in and tell me that over the past 2 weeks, there's been some older man with a truck and he's been sitting and watching me at least 5 separate occasions. Never stays less than an hour, just sits and watches. They weren't sure who he was watching at first, but one day when he was out there, I had to walk to the store and it was obvious that I was the only one that he was watching. It kind of freaked me out how obvious I was. Then the other night, as the last customer left, there was a man standing in front of the store, waiting for them to leave. He fit the description that the men gave me, so I was a bit weary. He tried to get in once he saw that they were gone, and I was alone, so I thought fast and locked the door and said that we were closed. He became visibly frustrated and started asking if he could talk to me, that he couldn't hear me through the glass. He had a creepy, almost excited look on his face, like a dog about to get fed. I told him no, that I had to close and that he needed to go, and he started to knock on the glass harder and harder. I told him I was going to call the police and walked to get my phone, and when I looked back, another store owner had come out to see if I needed any help, and he was gone. I haven't seen him since, but my job had started getting a lot of these hang-up calls recently. I have a taser and pepper spray, but I'm only 5'2" and 100 pounds. I don't know if I'll be able to defend myself well enough against a 200-pound dude. Properly creeped out and didn't know what I should do. Don't really want to be the subject of an episode of investigation, discovery. This was about 20 years ago, and I still think about this creeper from time to time. I was working the overnight shift at a local gas station, 7-Eleven, and part of the overnight shift was building the Sunday newspapers. The paper company would deliver stacks of different sections, and we'd have to assemble them and put them out for sale. We had a little nook set up in the back corner of the store where people would do this. You could clearly see the door from the spot, and we didn't get a lot of traffic in the middle of the night. We had 2 panic buttons in the store, one mounted under the counter and a portable one that I always carried in my apron pocket. One evening, I'm back in the nook, and a guy walks in, straight back to me. He is very tall, thin, and pale. He is dressed in all black, including a full-length black trench coat. He asked me if I've seen anything strange tonight. I'm thinking that he's the strangest thing that I've seen in all a while. I replied with no, and asked him if there was anything that I could do to help him. He then went on this rant about how he is on a mission from God to wipe out all the demons that are walking amongst men. He can see people's true forms, and that's why he carries this for protection. As I am simultaneously shifting myself and pressing my pocket panic button, this wacko pulls out a fucking cross out of his pocket. It had to be like 7 inches long. He then hollers that God is calling and runs out of the door. A few seconds later, the cops show up, and I fill them in. They drove up and down the stretch of road that we were on and didn't find anyone on foot. They came back and told me to keep the panic button closed, and they'd check on me periodically. That was one of the longest shifts of my life, and I quit shortly after. You see a lot of crazy working on the night shift, but that guy was a whole lot of crazy that I didn't want to meet again. This happened a few hours ago during my night shift, and for some reason was so disturbing to me. I'm a police officer in a big city, so I've had to deal with pretty awful sights and smells while doing this job, usually on a daily basis. This, however, was something even more unusual. There's a large homeless population in the city, with mental health and substance abuse being common issues amongst this population. It isn't uncommon to see a homeless person suffering from mental illness, acting strange late in the night. And if they aren't hurting themselves or anyone else, that's fine with me. It's about 11 p.m., and I'm stopped at a red light on a very quiet and dark street. I'm the only one on the road. I look to my right, just observing the street, and see a skinny man in ragged clothing on the sidewalk with their feet planted on the ground, belly arching towards the sky, and their hands planted on the ground over their head. I thought, that's kind of interesting. While holding this position, the person snaps their head towards me, then look back towards the sky, and proceeds to do some fucking exorcist spider walk up the sidewalk at a speed which seemed like it was the only way that they walked. I immediately thought, what the fuck, as this man navigated the sidewalk in a horror movie fashion. I have no idea why that style of walking is so disturbing, but Jesus Christ, did it bring back some childhood memories of the Exorcist movie, scaring the shit out of me. I just got home from my job delivering pizzas in a small town in North Carolina, and my heart's still pounding from what I saw tonight. I just started recently, and this was the first time I've ever done a night shift. I hope it's my last. I was going back to the store after a delivery a little after 9 o'clock when I saw it riding towards me on a bicycle. It looked like a person for the most part, but it was wearing one of those black plastic Halloween masks, like you can get from any store. The mask had a wavy line from the top left, wearer's right, to the bottom right, which separated the mask into a purple half and half orange. I couldn't tell what it was wearing because it was too dark and the clothes were black. Out of the top of the mask, there was something that could have been hair, but it seemed strange to me. The hair was at least a foot tall on its own, and the only way I can describe it is like a plant of some sort. It looked like a bunch of tangled branches and vines all sprouting out of this thing's head. It was doing a wheel stand all the way down the street towards me without losing an iota of balance. The thing that really tipped me off was that this thing wasn't human, though it was the aura that it gave off though. I couldn't stop looking at it for more than a second. It drew my eyes almost magnetically, and every second that I looked at it, the more terrified I felt. It wasn't just my natural reaction of fear either. This was powerful and evil. My head started pounding. I was screaming involuntarily, and tears welled up in my eyes. I was about to take a turn when I saw it coming towards me as soon as I completed the turn, barely able to look at where I was going. The thing just disappeared. I turned around to look back down the street, and it was gone. I was still extremely rattled, panting like a whining dog, but I knew I had to make it back to the store. I made a slight left onto this long avenue where my store is located when I saw it riding towards me again, still doing a wheel stand. It started out on my right, but rode around me to get to my left as I proceeded towards the store. I was trying my best to outrun it, but it was keeping up with me exactly until it suddenly jumped off of the bike onto the sidewalk and caught it without effort. I was still screaming and tearless crying this whole time, but I whipped my truck into that store, hoping it meant safety. To my horror, I saw the bicycle, not belonging to anyone in the store, leaned up against the wall directly in front of my parking spot. I looked across the street to where I had seen it and saw nothing was there. I hesitated to even leave my truck, but I had to complete my shift, so I went inside with my guard up as much as I could. My coworkers were all fine, but there were no customers in the store. That's not unusual considering the time of night, but that meant that this bicycle owner was MIA. I rubbed my face for a few moments in front of the fan and grabbed my next delivery. I exited the store to discover that the bike was gone, even though I hadn't noticed anyone moved it. I worked the rest of my shift until 10 and didn't see the thing again. That's not to say that there was nothing out of the ordinary, but the bike stalker was gone at least. The whole way home, I was unnaturally paranoid around every curve and corner. I feared that it would be standing in the road waiting for me. I could see it in my head. The vision I had of it standing on a certain bridge on my way home just felt so real, and I nearly drove into the creek. I'm home now in what I hope is safety, but I definitely am still on edge. I've seen a lot of things in my 20 years, but I have never experienced anything like that. I don't know how much of a difference there is going to be with the formatting because I am on mobile, but spelling is definitely not as good due to swipe to type. Alright, here's some context. Back in September, I was taking Hunter's Ed class with my dad. Basically, you learn parts of a gun, how to handle the gun safely, etc. Since it was in person and not an online class, the instructors had stories to tell. These were about people not handling guns correctly, drunk shooting, etc. Most of them didn't end well. We were going shooting a lot those 2 weeks to prepare for the test at the end. One time we went to an abandoned town that a lot of people shot at. It had been shut down due to the high lead levels. I had butterflies the whole ride, but brushed it off as just nerves. Mistake number 1. That evening we were the only ones there. We thought it would be pretty nice since there'd be more spots open. Keyword, thought. We settled on a spot behind a hill and shot another hill nearby. My dad was sighting the .22 gun that we had just bought, and I was sitting behind him. My earplugs were in, so it was hard to hear anything, especially far away. All of a sudden, there was a very loud shot. It had to have been my dad since I was so close to him, and it was so loud. I was initially scared, as the above-mentioned stories that we were told about shots being accidentally fired that didn't end well. In a concerned voice, I asked if it was my dad. He said no. My fear became much greater. Another shot was fired, and our only thought was to become seen. We quickly unloaded the gun, so it was safe, and ran onto the hill. Mistake number 2. My mom was wearing bright yellow, and we were all jumping up and down, waving our arms. There was no way that we couldn't be seen. After 2 or 3 more shots, we ran to the edge. It was like a valley or dried out lake. The edges were very high. We were at the bottom. The shooter was at the top. The next part confirmed our belief that he had seen us and still continued to shoot. My dad called the police to report what was happening. He walked further out to see details like the color of the truck, how many people, etc., and was in view of the shooter. Just a bit after my dad got off the phone, the guy left, probably assuming that the cops and authorities were called. We wished we had brought the gun because we were convinced he was shooting at us. We stayed where we were for a long time, waiting for the police, when a group of maybe 4 or 5 high schoolers came. My dad went and warned them about the previous events, and we decided after 15 minutes of waiting and no police arriving, we wanted to get out of there. We went avidly gathering our stuff, and I had looked at where the shots came from with some goggles or something that told distance. The shots were no more than 25 meters away. If he had bumped these guns just a bit, we'd be dead or in the hospital. Driving away, the police finally came. They asked us some questions and we were finally able to get the crap out of there. He was unfortunately never caught, and we fortunately never went back there. We don't know if he was trying to mess with us, trying to shoot us, or just drunk, but we were terrified. So, possibly drunk long-distance shooters. Let's not meet. This happened in 2009 to 2011, when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I have 5 siblings, and we were driving from Colorado to Arizona with all kids being 5 to 13 years old, and just my mom with us. I remember it being about 10 o'clock at night, and my mom was so exhausted that we had to stop at a hotel in the middle of nowhere in Utah. Being 2 to 3 hours away from where we were originally supposed to stop, we went in, and the guy working the lobby told my mom that they didn't have any rooms available. Kids were crying and nodding off. Mom was begging him to check again because we were so far away from civilization. No idea why the hotel was full, as I remember it being pretty big, but it was apparently. Cue creepy guy. I remember him being in his late 20s or early 30s. White guy with shaggy brown hair. He had been sitting in the lobby when we came in, but approached my mom when she was nearly in tears. Creepy guy. I have a room you can stay in if you would want. Mom. No, that's okay. Creepy guy. There's 2 twin beds. It'll be fine. Mom. Really, it's okay. My husband is expecting us at the next stop. Creepy guy. Here. I have an extra key. You're obviously tired. Come lay down and rest. I'll buy another room for your kids. Being, 10, I didn't see an issue with this, nor did I notice that the guy in the lobby had just said that there's no more rooms. So creepy guy couldn't have even gotten a separate room. I just remember this guy insisting even as my mom gathered us 6 kids up and pulled us closer. She thanked the lobby guy and rushed us all out. Creepy guy followed us out the door, insisting that we take his room. Thankfully, Mom had parked out front in a little roundabout, so she practically threw us in the car and drove off. I remember her sobbing as soon as we got out of that parking lot, but being too scared to pull over. Us kids were obviously confused, asking why we didn't stay. Dumb kid shit like that. Mom explained that that was a creepy guy, and if someone ever does something like that, and we don't know them, don't trust them. We're pretty sure that this guy was following us, because a car that was following us kept flashing their brights for like the next hour, then turning the lights all the way off and pulling close enough before flashing them again. The road was empty otherwise. We stopped at a gas station once the guy stopped following us, so my mom could get some coffee, so we could make it the rest of the way to our stop. I still remember how terrified my mom was, and how scared we were as kids, as we turned around in our seats, watching the car following us. Definitely one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. Alright, so this happened about 8 months ago. My family, my friend, and I were all on vacation in Conkin, Texas. We rented an Airbnb just to stay in for a week. It was a nice house with a backyard having a little green belt forest to the left. My friend and I would play hide and seek out there just for fun because of how many good spots there were. When it started to get dark, he wanted to continue playing, so we did. Nothing strange happened. For the next 2 days, my whole family, me and him, go out and just have fun, fishing and hiking. On about the 3rd day of us staying in this house, we get back about 6 to 7 p.m., and by then the sun is kinda starting to set, so we go out and play hide and seek in the dark, in the woods. At the back of the house, there's a back door that leads out to a little patio with a roof and walls with window screens. Basically just a small room. And once you walk out of that room, the entire backyard is just grass with a fire pit in the middle. If you were to turn left, there's the forest. In the far left corner of the yard, there was this little path that led into the woods, and that's where we would go through to play. Also, there was a small shed on the left side of the house, right by the tree line of the woods. Keep in mind, it was about 8 p.m. because of how long we were playing outside, so by now it was super dark. The only light was the moon, the flashlight on my phone, and a small light on the patio, which can barely be seen once you go into the woods. We've been playing for almost an hour, and it's my turn to find him. This is a pretty important part to know. My friend hid right next to the shed, which is right next to the tree line, so he wasn't really hiding in the forest. But I obviously didn't know at the time. So, as I'm walking straight through the forest, the path that didn't really have any turns, I decided to start recording on my phone, and I started to kind of give up after looking for him for about 2 minutes, so I call his name, Javi. It's silent for about 3 seconds, and out of nowhere, I hear this high-pitched screech from about 40 feet away, little bit to my right. At first I thought this was him, so I started walking towards the noise, waiting for him to jump out at me. I was about in the middle of the woods, and the noise 100% came from in front of me, not behind me, where my friend was hiding by the shed. So whatever made this noise wasn't him. After a few seconds, I said his name again. Javi? The same noise again, but in a higher pitch. I tried to laugh it off, creeped out, so I yelled his name once again, and whatever was making that noise responded with a howling type of noise, but it sounded closer to me. I immediately sprint out of there, sounding like a little nerd while running. Bro, stop, this isn't funny. When I get back to the backyard, I shine my flashlight near the shed because he was breaking sticks, and then he jumps out to scare me. I asked him if it was him making all those noises and if he heard it too, and he replied with, I thought it was you. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. I was about 10 and my cousin was 13. I asked him if he had known anything about this deep web, and apparently he did, and then asked me, I know how to get onto it, you want to try? I was scared and told him no, it's too dangerous, but he laughed. Don't be such a scaredy cat, nothing will happen. All these stories are fake. So he installed, of course, Tor on my computer. After I installed it, I had no clue what to do, so let my cousin do it. Yes, we got in. Perfect, now we have the fun stuff to look at. We entered the deep web wiki and went to some drug sites, gun sites, stuff like that. Drugs, guns, everything is on here, man. Then we saw a strange site. There was a video called Phoebus. We downloaded it. Wonder what this could be. So we downloaded the video. Then we watched it, and it was a female tied up, abused, naked, and more. We clicked off of the video and tried to delete it, but it wasn't deleted if it wasn't in the recycling bin. So we tried, but it didn't work. It would not leave. Then a user by the name of RNSDIT used the chat box to tell us, face cam me right now. We got scared and tried to exit Tor, but it didn't work. Soon the search tab started to become red. Me with tears in my eyes, my cousin with a pale face. We put a finger on the webcam and muted our microphone and answered the call. When we answered, the guy just sounded like a grown man, adult with a family, a real job. We were shocked when he asked for our age. Then he said, put your microphone and webcam on. I already got your phone number, your IP address, your address. We thought he was lying, so we typed in the chat, what's our address? And then he said it. So then I said, maybe if he sees us, and us being so little, then maybe he'll just leave us alone. So we uncovered our camera, unmuted the microphone, and as soon as we did, he then said, oh, you two look like some wonderful smart kids. What game do you want for free? I will give it to you. We set our game and he put this file on our computer, some sort of hack name after the game. We opened it and he had full control of our PC. He started posting our address, our IP, everything. We quickly closed our computer. The following 2 days, we kept getting these threats and messages. I'm gonna come to your house and kill you, etc. After 2 days, it stopped for about 2 weeks. But one night, I was alone at home. 7 p.m., my parents were away. Someone was at my front door. I remember what my mom told me not to open the door to anyone, so I ignored it. 5 minutes later, I hear some sort of broken glass sound. I went to check what it was. The window was broken. Then, I turned around, and what I saw was the worst moment of my life. The guy that we talked to on the webcam was standing there, smiling with yellow teeth and long hair. He grabbed me and said, "Where's your little friend?" As he was bringing me to his car, my parents just came. I remember my dad punching him, blood and broken teeth and a swollen eye. My dad basically almost killed that guy. After that, we called the police and then told my parents everything. We moved out of that city. New Wi-Fi, new computer, new everything. But they did put the password on there for me, so they can decide which files I can download until I am 13. Last year I did something bad. I got into the dark web with a few friends, and I'm telling you, it is real. There's a certain site that I'm not going to give the full name of. Let's just call it the Black Room. Me and my friends waited until our parents went to bed, and then all three of us pulled up chairs to this computer. It was a live streaming site that read something, but it translated to live preview in Serbian. There was a black screen and people were typing in a chat box in another language. We just watched and waited for something to happen. A topless woman with long, brown, dark hair appeared in the chair. She was wearing blue jeans. Her hands were tied with what looked like to be blue rope and duct tape around. I guess it was to make sure that she didn't get out. Her feet were cuffed with what looked like to be metal leg cuffs. She had a blank look on her face. The camera flashed off to dark again. It looked like someone was covering the camera with a towel. Then I heard the sick sound of a drill being turned on. The towel was removed. I heard her shouting in another language, probably begging for her life, screaming and crying, but she couldn't move. There was a shirtless man in a BDSM mask. If you don't know what that is, I suggest you looked it up. It was a black leather looking mask with eye holes and a zipper where you could unzip the mouth. She began screaming and I wanted to turn away, but curiosity got the best of me. He put the fat metal tip of the drill straight into her damn eye and made a sickening squishing sound, and she was moaning and screaming as the drill went directly through her eyeball. Dark red blood began oozing out, and it looked like the poor woman was going into shock. She was shaking so bad. The camera had zoomed in. Her eye was still attached, but had major blunt force trauma. It looked like a big black bloody hole. Her eye was half there somewhat. It was really hard to look at. Then the camera lens went black again. We heard two loud pops sounding like a gun, and then it was silent. No more sound, no more video. The viewing was obviously over. Oh my God, I just told my friends. I just think that we witnessed a murder. They shot her. They really fucking shot her. My friends and I agreed that we should never watch anything like this again. I went home feeling completely disgusted with myself. I hoped and prayed that it wasn't real. Sadly, it may have been. I promised myself no more. I would never watch anything like that again. That lasted until about next weekend. Next Saturday night, after playing on the PS4 for a few hours, we began to get tired and smoked a few joints to wake up. Then my best friend we will call Rob suggested that we go again on the dark web. Rob is a computer genius and knows how to get onto the dark web so easily. He used a VPN. We decided to click on the Black Room again. Rob told me that only about 4% of the internet is visible and the other 96% remains on this deep web. That made me feel a little bit sick to my stomach. What a disturbing thought. It took a few hours, and the site wanted us to pay a little bit with Bitcoin, so we did. I don't even know how we easily got in the first time without paying. I guess we just got lucky because they wanted us to pay next time. This time the screen was not black, and there was a concrete-looking room and a bucket. A big heavy-set man had a white pillowcase around his head and holes cut out where his mouth and eyes were. You could not see his face. He picked up the bucket and began laughing, showing us the bucket, and then showing us what was in the bucket. I almost threw up. This bucket was full of body parts. Human body parts just floating in a clotted red goop. I was assuming that it was coagulated blood. I just remember seeing bloody teeth, a few fingers, and what looked like to be a couple of eyeballs, or just what was left of them. This couldn't be real, I thought. But by the way that this man just laughed, it was not a joke. It had to be animal parts, I thought. Please let it be animal parts. The camera zoomed in on this bucket with a white piece of paper that read, "Victim number 12." It was written in a permanent marker. Was this the remains of some poor innocent soul who got brutalized like the first victim? Was this the remains of that poor lady that we saw last week? I had really hoped not. I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The screen went black again, and in the chair sat another woman. This time with blonde hair, and her eyes were covered in a black scarf. She was bound by her hands, her feet too, with the same thin blue rope. And I felt very sorry for her. Her waist was strapped in, with some sort of belt holding her down. A white sheet was hung over behind her. I wanted to help her and felt like there was nothing I could do. The fat man began dipping his hands into this gooey mess and trying to shove it in this woman's mouth. She tried to hold her mouth shut, but the man got angrier and slapped her in the face. It sounded like he was trying to tell her, "Eat it, eat it." She began to chew and cry, and then vomiting the whole mess up on her pretty white silk blouse. The chat box was going wild. People were typing in different languages, and the chat box was just popping. Then I heard it. The cranking of a chainsaw. There, standing beside this poor girl, appeared the same man from the first video. He was holding a chainsaw, shirtless, black mask and all. I got an even more sickened feeling in my stomach. This is not gonna be good. I had seen what chainsaws do to people. Chainsaw accidents are horrible. I wanted to stop viewing right then and there, but my friends were eager to watch, and I didn't want to seem like a little wuss. She was screaming her guts out, flailing trying to get out of this chair. Good thing we all had our headphones on, because this was really, really loud. I watched in horror as he began to try to cut her arm off. The chainsaw went a little through, and then it kicked back in a jerking upward motion, coming close to knocking her attacker out. He must have hit her arm bone, I thought. I think this really angered him. I could hear him screaming in another language, so I assume he might have nicked himself by the chainsaw. Suddenly, he shoved the blade directly into her stomach area. He pushed and began to cut her upwards, vertically. Her faint screams muffled by the chainsaw. Droplets of blood began spraying all over the air, onto the sheet. Little pieces of meat and tissue flew all over him, and all over the room. She began convulsing. Her eyes rolled back, and she was gone. Just like that. The man slowly pulled away the chainsaw, and as he did, I could see what looked like to be her intestines hanging out. The screen went black. I ran to the bathroom to throw up. I think I threw up for about 15 minutes. I almost passed out. My friends laughed at me, and I knew behind the laughter, it disturbed them too. All I know now is there are some really sick people out there in different parts of the world that are willing to do anything on the web for money. These people have no heart. They have no souls. They are inhumane and sick in the head. So stay off the dark web. There are just some things that you can never forget that will disturb your mind forever. You will not be able to undo what you have seen. Remember that. I will preface this story by saying that my mother has always claimed that she's some psychic or has some psychic power and was able to automatically write and use Ouijas very well. I'm an atheist and kind of skeptic, so even though over the years I had witnessed some pretty crazy stuff, nothing like this. I'm a 30-year-old male, and my 22-year-old female 4.0 college student fiance passed away suddenly 3 months ago to this day, and even on a Friday. So me, my friend who believes she can see spirits and auras, and my mom decided to try to contact my fiance after my mother decided to visit a psychic who told her things about her son being constantly followed by a female spirit. So, commence Ouija board session. By lighting all of my fiance's candles and putting her stuff/letters to me all over our old bedroom, my mom asked specifically for her over and over again. Finally, this oracle, plastic moving thingy, whatever it's called, started to move quickly and randomly. Then we asked it if it was her. It went to yes. Then I asked if she could spell out our song, and she did. It was Ho Hey by the Lumineers. So I asked her what her favorite movie was. She spelled out Braveheart. Bingo. I asked her how she died, and not only did she tell us, but she named the freaking city. Then we asked her if she was happy, if she still loved me, if she was waiting for me on the other side, etc. We asked if she was my guardian angel now, and she said yes. Then I asked her a question, a secret only I knew, and asked if I should tell it to her twin sister. She said not yet. Then I said, how long? More than a year? Yes. So 2 years? Yes. Then here's the part that blew me right away. She said she couldn't talk anymore, and I asked her if she could just say goodbye to me. She said, XO, XO. XO was what she got tattooed on her, because we ended every text between us with an XOXO. She even changed all of her screen names online to end with XO. I still can't believe what I witnessed tonight, and I cannot describe the amount of comfort I have after speaking with her tonight. Even though I would normally never believe in things like this, I know what I saw. Edit. This tragedy was so awful that I didn't even think I would ever recover. I am slowly healing though. One thing I forgot to mention in my original post was that when I asked her, is there anything you want me to do? She responded with, be happy. Edit 2. A couple of things that I'd like to add in is that she was brain dead, but in a coma for 4 days before she died. We asked her if her soul had passed over peacefully, and she said no. We asked if the coma was hard for her soul, and she said yes. We asked if her coma and crossing over was painful. She said yes. Also, I would like to say that with my mom as a medium who has quote-unquote proven psychic abilities, and with all of the personal things and secrets that she knew, and her saying XO has me convinced that we were indeed talking to her and not a bad spirit. Yes, there was a huge sense of closure for me knowing that she is okay, and that she's watching over me, waiting for me, and that she wants me to be happy. I haven't felt this good since she passed. And for a little more background, we couldn't have been more in love than we were. Most people that knew her will say that she loved me more than anyone has ever loved anyone else, more than they loved their own spouse, etc. And down deep, I felt the same exact way over her. This was some Princess Bride shit. We were downright head over heels in love. I had never, in my 30 years, planned on getting married, and we had already picked a date. Sort of. This happened way back when I was in the first grade. My family lived in a rural area in the Philippines. I went to a private school in a small town nearby. In fact, there weren't a lot of students in my school. In my class, there was only about 6 students, including me, 3 guys and 3 girls. We all got along well. The story started when the movie titled Spirit of the Glass came out. I only have a vague recollection of it, but I do remember that it was about a group of friends playing with this game called Spirit of the Glass, which was basically played like Ouija. As a matter of fact, I don't think there were really any differences between the two other than the name. My friend, who we'll call Mark, suggested that we played it. Among all of us, Mark was the troublemaker, if I could say. He was a little too adventurous and got injured a lot, but he was our charismatic leader, nonetheless. So, we set up a makeshift board using a pen and some paper and sat in a circle. We placed 2 fingers each on top of this coin that we were using as a planchette and began asking the usual questions like, is there a spirit here? What's your name? How did you die? That kind of stuff. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, you have to close your eyes while you play, and you only get to open it once the planchette stops moving. For non-yes or no questions, you have your eyes open and spell it out, letter by letter. Being the skeptic that I am, I chalked it up to just Mark or one of the others moving this planchette. I also assumed that it was rubbing my arm because during the game I was feeling someone gently rubbing their fingers on my arm. I stood up and called BS. Mark reprimanded me and told me that I apparently bothered the spirit by breaking the circle. He said the spirit is now stuck in our world since I closed the portal by breaking the circle. I sat back down, still not believing Mark. I told them that we should play with our eyes open, so I can show them that it's all fake. We asked a question, and I felt someone run their fingers on my arm. But it didn't make sense. My eyes were open, and I was looking at my arm. I looked up at Mark, who had the exact same look as I did, just wide-eyed and scared. None of us said a word. We all just bolted out of the room. But that wasn't the end of my nightmare. Days after that happened, my mom and I would constantly wake up in the middle of the night. Annoyed, I'd ask her why she was waking me up. She said that she could hear me crying. I told her I wasn't. In fact, my face was dry. There was no indication that I was crying. And the worst part was when she began taking my blanket away again. I asked her why. She told me that she was worried that I'll end up strangling myself, since every time she went to wake me up, she'd find the blanket wrapped around my neck. That stopped after a week, and my life just returned back to normal. I haven't used a Ouija board since, and if by curiosity you want to try it, I would advise against it. I still don't believe that ghosts exist, but I do believe that demons do. And I believe that what followed me home that day was a demon. It's been almost a year since I posted a story about my first encounter with a Ouija board. Things have gotten much worse. In this post, I told my story about the one and only encounter I had with a Ouija board. Here it was in a nutshell. I messed with a Ouija board when I was about 15. I scared one of my friends, making him think that the spirit wanted him dead. My friend left the room. When I was by myself, the Ouija board locked my hand on the pointer. I was just having fun until I saw what the pointer was spelling out. It was telling me to apologize. I tried to, but it didn't seem to work. I usually stay 2 days a year at my parents' house because whatever was pissed at me still is. It doesn't follow me, but I can't visit my parents for a long time. It stomps, slams doors, pretty much has a fit when I come over. It disappears after I leave. It really hates me. About a year ago, I invited my friend over to settle this problem. It didn't work. I decided to take it with me to college and toss it out halfway in the middle of nowhere. When I returned to my dorm, I hung out with friends, had a great time, and found the Ouija board sitting on my bed. That night I decided to burn it. We planned a bonfire, threw it in, and spent the rest of the night watching it burn. 11 months have passed. I moved out of the student housing with my fiance. We are having a great time at our new apartment, and tonight I hear an all too familiar sound. Scratching. At first I thought maybe it's just the cat. I searched and nothing. That occurred at about 9 last night. Tonight as I sit here, alone in my apartment, I made my fiance leave in case of any danger. A door slammed shut. This was followed with some heavy steps towards her, which scared the living shit out of her. Also, she found the board. It was in our small study room closet. Burned. Whatever is attached to me has come back for vengeance. I've jumped numerous times while typing this because the slamming around my apartment is just getting out of hand. I plan to leave tomorrow, find a way out of this mess. I've heard that my friend recently passed away, unrelated incident. I wish I could say sorry to him one last time.